Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us for the 2022 Clarion West Summer Reading Series. My name is Hugh Evans, and I volunteer on the Clarion West board. Thank you for joining us tonight, both here in person and online. We're delighted to have all of you, wherever you may be. So Clarion West's mission is to support emerging and underrepresented voices by providing writers with world-class instruction to empower their creation of wild and amazing worlds. Through conversation and public engagement, we bring those voices to an ever-expanding community. The chance to showcase the work of amazing instructors like Tobias S. Buckell is a big part of that opportunity. Thank you to Town Hall and the University Bookstore for partnering on tonight's event. Go buy lots of books. I also want to let you know that this series and our other classes and workshops would not be possible without the generous support of the Seattle Office of Arts and Cultural Affairs, King County for Culture, the National Endowment for the Arts, and many individual donors. Thank you. When I printed this out, there we go. I printed it out very large because I didn't want to have to mess with glasses. All right, the reading series continues through July 26th. All of the readings are on Tuesdays, and we're asking folks to register online at clarionwest.org. Next week's reading on Tuesday, July 19th, will also be here at Town Hall, Seattle, at 7:30 p.m. In addition to our reading series and summer workshop, the Clarion West Write-a-thon is officially underway. Well, has been for several weeks now. The Write-a-thon has turned into an international community event, and it's our longest-running fundraiser. Think of a walk-a-thon with words. Writers from all over the world sign up and set writing goals and then recruit sponsors to show their support by making a donation to Clarion West. That sponsorship is really important, not just to Clarion West, but to the individual writers. During the write-a-thon, writers stretch themselves and accomplish great things. Hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of new words are written that might not otherwise be written each year during write-a-thon. We are now up to, as of today, 587 writers participating in the Write-a-thon, and we're 52% of the way to our fundraising goal. I encourage all of you to consider sponsoring one or more of our magnificent Write-a-thon writers. Just visit the Clarion West website for details. Now, whether you're joining us in person or online tonight, we have time for Q&A at the end of the reading. We'll pass out index cards and pencils for in-person questions, and we will read questions from the YouTube chat for Toby to answer as well. Now, before I hand things over to Workshop Administrator Amy Hirayama, I have the special honor of introducing Nisi Shawl, who will be interviewing Tobias S. Buckell. To Nisi's many readers and fans among this audience, no introduction is needed. But for anyone visiting us tonight from another galaxy or the far side of some artificial genre divide, Nisi is a multi-award winning and nominated author and editor, a writer of book reviews and essays, co-author of the deservedly praised Writing the Other, which is kind of an essential work for writers these days, always, co-founder of the Carl Brandon Society, and current member of Clarion West's Board of Directors. Nisi is currently working on the much-anticipated sequel to their Nebula Award-nominated novel Everfair, which is amazing if you haven't read it. I am really excited about the sequel. So thank you, Nisi, for being here tonight. I'm looking forward to your conversation with Toby. So thank you all again for your support. Next, I'd like to invite Workshop Administrator Amy Hirayama to tell you more about our Instructor of the Week and featured Author of the Night, Tobias S. Buckell.
In his book, It's All Just a Draft, Tobias Buckell encourages writers to put the cool stuff up front. But when it comes to Tobias, what is the cool stuff? Is it that he was born in Grenada and spent his formative years living in a houseboat and absorbing the culture and lore of the Caribbean? Is it that he attended Clarion West when he was a college student, arrived with $5 in his pocket, no idea how to pay for tuition, and sustained himself on hot dogs and stolen ketchup packets for the duration of his 6 weeks? Maybe the cool stuff is that he won the 2019 World Fantasy Award for The Tangled Lands, or that he's been nominated for, among many others, the Hugo, Nebula, and Locus Awards. I think a lot of Tobias's cool stuff lies in the way he blends the art of writing with the art of teaching. He is eager to pass along the lessons he learned as a writer, including how to see his over 750 rejections as progress. He doesn't have to offer that kind of behind-the-scenes look at a writer's life, but he is not only in this for himself. He's interested in uplifting new writers and contributing to the future of speculative fiction. When Tobias introduced himself to this year's Clarion West class, he told them, "I will throw myself at a dying story no matter what." This established, successful author looks for the strengths in a story, gets excited about what he sees, and offers to nurture it, to help take it to the next level, as he tells students. How cool is that? In an industry that has a reputation for being competitive and heartbreaking, Tobias shared with us the importance of building relationships, of reaching out and creating community among writers. From the wide lens of the nature of publishing down to the intention behind specific word choice. We did sentence diagramming today, you guys. We are so lucky to spend this evening with a writer who not only knows his art, but is so generous in the ways that he shares it. Please join me in welcoming Tobias Buckell and Nisi Shawl.
Well, that guy sounds cool, and I can't wait to meet him.
We're going to start out talking. First, I'm going to stop sitting on my microphone. Maybe turn it on. Is it on?
I think so. Want to try that one?
Yeah. Yeah.
Hello.
Okay.
Can you hear us okay? All right, great.
So my first question is not actually a question, so it's more of a comment. So I will tell you the first story that I read of yours that made a deep impression on me. We've known each other for a few years, but this was before I knew you. It was a story called In the Heart of Calicuata. And it was part of an anthology of men writing as women. Whoa, revolutionary. And what I noticed, what made it stand out from the other stories, was that story after story in this anthology had, just envisioned the wonders of birth. And just about every single author in this anthology was like, and then I can have a baby. You were the only one that was like, but then I can have contraception. And I was like wowed by the empathy and by the power of you putting yourself in someone's place that you hadn't been in before. Because I assumed that you had never been a woman.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah. So that is what made a huge impression on me. Do you have anything to say about that story?
Thank you. That's a deep cut, Nisi, in terms of going into my background there. So this is an anthology that is in some ways as awkward as you implied. And I was very much starting at the beginning of my career. And,
very much.
Jeff Vandermeer actually just posted the cover and dragged it on Twitter not too long ago. Not my story, but just the concept.
Yeah.
The thing. And just in a small defense of it, it was not supposed to be just men writing SF as women. There was supposed to be like a full anthology of men and women, with the rule being they had to use another character. But then the DAW books decided to split it into two.
Oh.
So if you find it just the way it is, it looks weird. But there's also a fantastic companion woman. There's a fantastic companion volume of women writing SF as men, and it's like it's a whole other grade cut above its companion volume.
Well, I mean, you really stood out in that. I mean, it was like you put some thought into this. It was amazing.
Thank you.
So I also have a favorite cover of your work, which is not that one that Jeff Vandermeer dragged. It is part of the Xenowealth series. What was it called? Sly Mongoose. Yeah. That is the one that has, I don't know if you've ever seen the Tor hardcover. It's just this great shot of like this black woman with this huge gun she's shooting, like it's like a missile. Like, I love it.
That was that was Ragamuffin.
Ragamuffin, that's
and
what it was.
it's a minigun. Yeah, she's using a minigun to propel herself down the center of an O'Neill habitat.
Yes.
And very fun, very fun. Yeah. I actually built a spreadsheet to work out what the accelerative properties would be of a minigun firing at a certain rate, and how fast it would propel the characters down the center of like the no gravity center of an O'Neill colony, and had to figure out like how to decelerate them. Like there's a whole bunch of math associated with it to make me feel comfortable enough to portray the scene.
So, what's your favorite cover of your many books?
My absolute favorite cover is actually Sly Mongoose, the third novel, because two things. One, Todd Lockwood was the cover artist, and he's a pretty groovy dude. And at the time, there's a vision I had, which is when I started out in publishing, is I really wanted to have a cover with a Caribbean dude with dreadlocks, just proudly on the cover. And I just wanted to have a book on the shelf that had that. And so when I wrote Sly Mongoose, they commissioned the cover before they had a lot of the novel.
Oh.
Right? And so they asked me if we know you only have like a third to a half of the novel done, but would you be willing to give us the first 3 chapters to try and have Todd illustrate? And I said, well, actually, there's a chapter I have in mind that's pretty perfect that I think could make a great cover. Do you mind if I send that instead? And they said, sure. So then I took the night off and wrote a chapter that had nothing but these cover elements that I wanted the cover of the book to be. And I sent it to them, not even knowing whether or not I'd be able to even include that in the final copy of the book, because it was for some events that take place towards the end of it. But I thought, wow, if I can just describe this for Todd, I have a sense that what we'll get is a big Caribbean dude with dreadlocks and a big frickin' gun, just firing at these airships, and it's gonna be frickin' awesome. And it was everything I'd hoped for.
Okay, so I was naming the one that was your favorite when I meant Ragamuffin.
I love Ragamuffin as well, because getting a just a black Caribbean woman firing a massive helicopter-sized minigun down the center of O'Neill colony was everything I wanted to kind of say about what kind of science fiction I wrote.
Okay, well, good. I'm glad that we're like maybe a little close to each other on that one. My other question, I guess, I want to know if the Xenowealth series was initially conceived of as a series.
Yes and no. The Xenowealth series is my novels Crystal Rain, Ragamuffin, Sly Mongoose, and The Apocalypse Ocean, and Xenowealth, a collection of short stories. And it actually began out of my senior thesis. My senior thesis in undergrad was to create a bunch of connected short stories, and I sort of did a lot of research to build a world. or set of worlds, world building, whatever you want to call it. And I'd built this universe. And out of that, when I first tried to write a novel, I kind of went back on that and kind of leaned on that universe. And so, yeah, it was this thing where I had written a couple short stories in the universe, and I had some ideas, and I just wanted to see if I could take them out in a novel form. So I was already doing like lots of different kind of serial stories in the universe. So the
Lots
first
of connections.
Yeah, lots of connections. And so the first story, I mean, I never knew, you don't know, like, if you're ever going to get asked to do another novel. So when I wrote Crystal Rain, it was done with the idea that this was my one shot. And after this, I figured publishing would be like, that was a huge mistake and we'll never, ring your phone again. But as soon as I'd finished that novel, they asked for a second novel. And I, out of a lack of any other better ideas, was like, well, can I, for the first one I did Caribbean planetary adventure. Can I do like Caribbean space opera for the next one? And they're like, send us a proposal. So I was just sort of like, yes, it's Caribbean, but everyone's in outer space now. And it's related to the previous novel. And so they bought it. And so then I was like, oh shit, I got to write this now.
Yeah.
So that became book 2 in the series. And then, at that point, you're kind of like, well, I guess I got to do some more. And in retrospect, it might have been smarter to do it as a standalone, but I'm pretty happy with the series and proud of what it accomplished and, what it said and what I set out to do. So it all worked out.
Yeah, it was beautiful. Which of these was the one that was modeled after turn of the 20th century diving boys' adventures?
That's Sly Mongoose.
Okay.
So you have like odd research interests as a writer, and so one of them is like I love these old 1920s pulp era diving bell adventure stories. It's those guys in those giant metal suits getting lowered down to the bottom of the ocean to like look for treasure, and I read a lot of those when I was a kid, and I also love. I love that part of every submarine movie you watch, that moment where they're like dive, 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 and they get depth charged and leaks spring and they're under incredible pressure and they've gone so deep that the hull is starting to creak, And I was like at a convention where I ran into Jeff Landis, who's a friend of mine. He's an actual NASA scientist, brilliant dude. And he kind of pulled me aside and said, I know you came to my Mars presentation where he does this thing wherever he goes to a convention or a conference where he does like a one-man show, traveling show on behalf of NASA. And he'll do a slideshow about every mission that they have planned to a certain planet. And it's like, you learn a lot, right? Because he knows ones that you've never even seen talked about in the media, right? Like he knows all the dark corners and crevices of NASA. And so he pulled me aside and he's like, I know you were at the Mars presentation, but he's like, you should really come to the Venus presentation. I think there's stuff you'll like. So I went to the Venus presentation and there was a lot of stuff I liked, including his calculations on the fact that if you wrap a city-sized object in a bubble of regular breathable air, it'll float a couple miles above, the worst of the Venetian atmosphere. It'll be the same temperature as Earth. You're above the acid rain, which is a huge plus. And the pressure isn't crushing because it's the same pressure as Earth. And so I said, floating cities on Venus? Like, are you going to do anything with that, Jeff? He goes, no. I'm like, I'm going to write a freaking novel about that. And he says, well, I'll burn you a CD full of all my research. Really? So I got a CD full of all of his like math and Excel spreadsheets and NASA details and whatnot. And I went off and I wrote a far future space opera on a fake Venus so that I could just basically use all this stuff because I was like, yeah, you could have airships that dive down into the Venetian atmosphere to crush depth. Like it's a submarine adventure, and then I have people being lowered in pressure suits all the way to this Venetian floor to do stuff, And I was just like, this is like all of my weird niche interests I get to put in a book. It's great.
And that is what we talk about when we talk about cooperation and community also. Yeah. Arctic Rising and Hurricane Fever, were those also conceived of or not as a series?
So they were conceived of as a series, and that's because, the Xenowealth series was doing okay. I always earned out my advance, and
Yeah.
and I enjoyed the sales. But I'm ambitious and competitive, and when I was in my early 30s, late 20s, plucky, and when I started to realize that we weren't growing sales on the Xenowealth series, my editor and I kind of put our heads together and we went like, well, we've got a couple books under contract with Tor still. Why not try something different just for, shits and giggles? Let's just try to shake things up and see what happens. So I came up with the idea of Arctic Rising and Hurricane Fever to slot into kind of like two books that I owed Tor instead of doing a fifth Xenowealth novel, just because I wanted to see if I could boost into the next level of sales, the next level of readership.
And it did.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
Arctic Rising, we were on the extended Washington Post bestseller list for like, a couple weeks. So it did well. It was the best-selling book of mine, of that point. But Hurricane Fever, less so. It came out at an awkward point when my editor was leaving the company and I was being handed over to other editors, and so it just didn't have the same internal support.
Well, that's too bad because I really, really, really dig that one.
Hurricane Fever is my love letter to the Caribbean, in many ways.
Yeah, I mean, Arctic Rising is cool. Yes, of course it's cool. But, okay, do you guys know what we're talking about here? No. Hurricane Fever is like sort of Caribbean James Bond climate fiction.
That's pretty much what it is, yeah.
Yeah. And Arctic Rising, I don't know. I don't have a snappy one-liner for
if
that.
James Bond was born in the Caribbean but briefly had to like settle shit in the Arctic North before going back to the Caribbean.
Yeah. So good. Okay, so that was conceived of as a series then.
It was. I had a triptych in mind. We never got around to doing a third book, which would have been called Antarctica Ascendant. I really wanted to do an Antarctic novel.
So when are you going to do this one?
I have no idea.
Okay. All right. Okay. Then I will just skip ahead and we'll just pretend that it doesn't have
It was
any...
meant to be two books, yeah.
Yeah, right. Okay.
There is no Antarctica.
Yeah. So my next question, maybe you should do your reading and then I can ask you about this
Absolutely.
question. Okay.
All right, let's see. So the story I'd like to read to you all is called Toy Planes, and I will stand up and use the podium there. We'll do it proper. All right, everyone hear me okay? Yeah. All right. My sister Joni's deft hands flicked from dreadlock to dreadlock, considering her strategy. "You're always leaving," she said, flicking the razor on. And suddenly I'm 5, chasing her with a kite made from plastic bags and twigs, shouting that I was going to fly away from her one day. "I'm sorry," I said. "Please, let's just get this done." I'd waited long enough. I'd grown dreads because when I studied in the U.S., I wanted to remember who I was and where I came from, as I'd begun to slowly lose my Caribbean accent. But the rocket plane's sponsor wanted them cut. It would have been a disaster, they said, for a helmet to not have a proper seal in an emergency. Explosive decompression was not something a soda company wanted to be associated with in their customers' minds. It was insulting that they assumed we couldn't keep the craft sealed, but we needed their money. The locks had become enough a part of me that I winced when the clippers bit into them, groaned, and yet another piece of me fell away. Later, in the back of the bus that I had pick me up, I hung onto a looped handle that swung from the roof as the driver rocketed down the dirt road from Joni's. My sister had found a nice house out in the country, a concrete house with a basement that opened up into a sloped garden on the side of a steep hill. She taught math at the school a few miles away, an open-shuttered building. And this would have been my future, too, if I hadn't have been so intent on getting off the rock. But the islands always called back to their children. We hit asphalt, potholes, and passed cane fields with machete-wielding laborers hacking away at the stalks as sweat-drenched shirts were knotted around their waists. It was hot, my arms stuck to the plastic-covered seats. The driver leaned into a turn and looked back. "I want to ask you something," he said, "and I really wish that the back seats had belts." "Sure," I said. "All that money you spending, don't want to think that it's better spent on Improved roads? He dodged a pothole. Or what about even more school funding? Colorful red and yellow houses on stilts dotted the steep, lush green mountainsides as I looked out the tinted windows and said, well, only one small part of the program got funded by the government. We found private investors, advertisers, to back the rest. And whatever the government invested, it will be repaid. Maybe. He looked dubious. I had my extra arguments. How many people lived on this island? Tens of thousands. Most of our food was imported, leaving us dependent on other food-producing nations, who all use satellites to track their farming. What spin-off technologies might come out of studying recycling in space? Why wait for other nations to get to it first? Research always produced good things for the people who engaged in it. But I was tired of arguing for it, and I only had sound bites for him, the same ones I had given the media, who treated us like kids trying to do something all grown up. The markets surrounded me in a riot of color, fruit, vegetables, women in dresses and bright floral patterns, and the noise of hundreds constantly bargaining over things like the price of fish. Teenagers stood around the corners with their friends, and I wandered around looking for something as we needed to fill the craft with enough extra weight to simulate a passenger, and we still had a few extra ounces left. I found a small toy stall, and standing in front of it I was 5 again, with no money, and a piece of scrap metal in the triangular shape of a space plane. And I'd pretend it was just like the real-life ones I'd read about in the books donated to my school after the hurricane. And at night, when the power would sometimes flicker out, I'd go out and stand on the porch, and I would look up at those bright stars, and I would envy them. And today, the stall had a small bottle, hammered over with soda can metal, and triangular welded-on wings, and a cone on the back. And it was painted in yellow, black, and green, and I bought it. The rest of the day was a blur. Getting to the field involved running the press. Yes, I'd cut my hair for safety reasons. Yes, I thought this was a good use of our money. Not just first world nations deserve space. It was there for everyone. There are pictures of me getting aboard the tiny rocket plane with a small brown package under my arm. The giant balloon platform the plane hung from shifted in the genty, salty island breeze. Not too far away, the waves hit the sand of the beach. And once we were inside, suited up and the door locked, everything became electronic. This was the cheapest way to orbit. Balloon up on a triangular platform to save fuel, then light the rocket plane up and head for orbit. We'd scavenge balloons and material from several companies, one about to go out of business. The plane chassis had once been used by a Chinese corporation during trials, and the guidance systems were, of course, all open source. Online betting parlors had our odds at 50%. We weren't even the first to try this, but we were the first island. The countdown finished. My stomach lurched, and I saw palm trees slide by the portholes to my right. I reached back and patted the package, that hammered together little toy, and I smiled. Hello out there, all you, I whispered into the radio. We coming up too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So that was a short story, a very short story.
Very short story.
My question, and I'm asking this knowing that it's a stupid question. What's the difference between a short story and a novel and a series?
That's a really good question. I think the novel is a multi-threaded tapestry, and a short story is a fired arrow.
Okay, a fired arrow. Is it an arrow on fire?
No, an arrow in flight.
Okay. Okay. Because I was picturing it setting fire to the tapestry.
Yeah. Burn it all down.
Yeah.
Start over from scratch.
Yeah. So, when did you write that?
When did I write that? I would have written that in. Let me pull up the metadata here real quick from my writing app. I would have written that in 2005 for Nature magazine. It was published in October of 2005.
Is it in Shoggoths in Traffic?
Nope. Shoggoths in Traffic is all fantasy stories.
Okay, good.
So Toy Planes is in my collection Tides from the New Worlds, but that's currently out of print. And it maybe, hold on, let me double check something here. Let's go into the metadata again, because that'll tell me where things are coming out. It is not going to be reprinted in my next short story collection called Zen and the Art of Starship Maintenance and Other Stories. But you can find it by just typing, well, if you're really curious about finding a copy of it, it is in Nature magazine. So if you just type Toy Planes Nature, it'll pop up.
So the reason I said good is because that is such a great segue to my next question, which is another question that I really dread answering myself. So I'm going to ask you, what's the difference between fantasy and science fiction?
Ooh.
You can just say, go away.
The difference between science fiction and fantasy, I think, we can get into some really sort of semantic stuff, but I think it has to do with symbology. I think the fact that people tag Star Wars as science fiction, even though it's actually fantasy, indicates that if you've got rivets and you're flying through space, people think it's science fiction, and it uses a symbolic set of objects that are science fictional, and fantasy uses a different set of symbolic objects, castles, dragons, magic systems, things like that. So I think it's just the symbolic tools that we use are different, but ultimately I view them as all sort of muddled up together.
Do you ever muddle them up together in your work?
I do. I mean, that's the fun thing about writing short fiction is you can do just about anything, right?
Yeah.
Novels too, but the novels have more constraints in terms of like getting them through an industry if you want them read and published, whereas short stories, there's a lot more room to blur boundaries and mess around, which is why I love them so much.
So which stories of yours are the best at blurring those boundaries?
That's a really good question. There was a young man in the audience that just was talking to me about a story, what was the story that we had that you mentioned? The Placement Agency, thank you. The Placement Agency blurs a lot of boundaries.
Okay.
That's a story that LeVar Burton read for LeVar Burton Reads. And
Yes.
I've always liked it because it blurs all these weird ass boundaries. It's a weird story. When LeVar chose it to read, I was like, are you sure? Out of all of my stories, you're picking this is an obscure selection here. But they really liked it, and he did a great job reading it, so more people have become aware of it and have listened to it. But that's one of my most blurry, weird ones. There's another one that I wrote for my Patreon that's about people fighting the personification of depression. That's sort of literalized and manifested, and leaving to take a vacation and get their heads straight. It's really weird.
And
it's science fiction, it's fantasy, it's everything. That story, what did I call that one? I'm sorry, this sounds really weird, but I've written 200 short stories in 20 years, and so...
And you change the titles sometimes, too.
Sometimes titles change, sometimes... I've written a lot of stuff, is what I'm saying. And so... everything's here on my phone, so sometimes I actually have to go back
what
and...
Cory Doctorow calls his cognitive prosthesis.
Yes, no, this is my second brain, right?
Yeah.
Without it, I would not be able to function. I have ADHD, and this thing is just really helps me out. It's a short story called When All Was Brillig.
Oh, nice title.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
And I wrote it for Patreon. I don't have it coming out in anything because it's part of a collection of I think probably 10 shorts. I almost have enough short stories to do a weird ass short story collection, which is the title. That's what I'm going to call it. Weird Ass Stories by Tobias Buckell. And here's the opening. Right? The first time I threw myself into the claws of the Reaper, everyone assumed it was a mistake. Surely, said the Reaper Master, she must have stumbled into its track, though we had all been taught since very young age how to avoid the great creatures. So,
Well, I guess people just have to join
Yeah.
your Patreon
This is really just me kind of twisting people's arms too. No, I'm actually hoping, so what I have this app called Ulysses, which I write in, which I really like, because it allows me to tag all the different files. And so what I do, you can't really see it here, but like I have different short story collections. I tag them if they're in a short story collection, and I have story themes. So I have a list of all these different kinds of story themes that I have identified in all my stories that could be potential collections. And one of them is just
Weird ass stories.
like life considered as a set of common security questions, right? That's one of my favorite short stories. People didn't really, people are not as excited about the story as I am, which is something that happens to us as writers, right? And it begins with this. My first pet's name was YH capital CV, open parentheses, close parentheses, 66, comma. My mom's maiden name was capital Z Dirta, waster of men's souls, comma, and we lived on 123 Nice Try Road.
Wait, LeVar Burton read 2 of your stories, didn't he?
Yes.
Yes.
The other story he read is thanks to you. The whole LeVar Burton connection is because of you, actually.
Oh, really?
Yes. New Sons was an awesome, incredible anthology you edited, right? And you were gracious enough to include my another weird-ass short story, but weird-ass science fiction short story, right?
The Galactic Tourist Industrial Complex?
Yes,
Yeah.
the Galactic Tourist Industrial Complex, which is a story I'd been wanting to write. I wanted an excuse to write that story forever, because I had gone down to the Bahamas and we went to this, I was taken to this massive tourist complex. Like you see ads for it on TV. If you ever see like go to the Bahamas and escape your life's worries, and it's designed by the same people who made the Palm Tree Island in the Emirates, right? And they basically had to get another little island off of the main Bahama island to like sprawl it onto, and they took over all these beautiful beaches that are now the locals are locked out of, kind of, right?
Yeah.
So it's like this Death Star that just dropped onto the main Bahamas island. And when I saw it, I was just like, some of the friends I was hanging out with locally there were like, just on a sheer size thing, we're kind of proud of it, right? Just because it's like, it's a mega structure in the Bahamas. It's just not something you see often. But others had complicated feelings about it. And I just remember standing there looking at the vastness of it and saying, that's the tourist industrial complex has landed here. And then I was like, that's a really clever phrase. I should figure out a way to put that into a story somewhere.
Yeah.
And so then when you asked me to do a story for New Sons, I was like, I have an idea. And then I botched the title, and we needed to come up with a better title. And I was like, well, let's use the phrase. Let's use the phrase that made me want to write this story.
Absolutely.
Put it up there.
Yeah.
And I was super psyched about that. And it was a fun story, and LeVar got a copy somehow of New Sons.
Well, LeVar wrote the introduction.
Right. That makes total sense. Another reason I was so delighted to be included, because let me tell you about LeVar Burton and me. I don't have a personal relationship with him, but I do have a parasocial relationship with LeVar, like I assume many people of this world do, right? Roots blew my mind when I was a young kid and watched the entire series, right? Because my name's Toby. I mean, it blew my mind because of the content matter, and I'd read Alex Haley's book, right? And it's just, but also my name's Toby. So my nickname, being the one white-looking guy in a Caribbean class full of people, for a chunk of my life, my nickname was Kunta Kinte. And people would often say to me, as I was passing by them, my name is Toby, just flipping it. And it was funny to us, right? So I felt like I had this deep relationship with LeVar long in the past. But also, I didn't have cable growing up. I lived on a boat, right? And on the boat, you don't get cable, and you don't get great reception because the boat's always moving at anchor, right? You're always like drifting in the wind. So the only channel we got was PBS, which meant that I watched a ton of Reading Rainbow, even long past aging out of it, because it was the only freaking thing that was on, right? And I was just like, well, it's LeVar. He's quality. He's good. It's awesome. Even if it's a kid's book he's recommending, I'm here for it. And then I started watching Next Generation because my stepdad's parents would record it onto a VHS tape at 3x, so you could get like 3 hours of show on it, and they would record it and mail it to us. This was like before the days of Netflix. We had Netflix. It was Family Flicks, right?
Yeah.
And so we would watch like hours and hours of Star Trek The Next Generation, which of course has LeVar Burton. So I was just like, LeVar Burton's just been an integral part of like my young adult identity. And so like, he wrote the introduction, so I was just kind of like, I'm in the table of contents with LeVar fucking Burton.
Yeah.
That was enough for me. I was delighted. And then I get this email that's like, hey, we're doing this thing called LeVar Burton Reads, and LeVar wants your story. Would you be willing to kind of talk more about this? Yeah, what are you going to say? No to LeVar Burton?
No, you're not going to do that. Yeah.
And then they gave me money, and I was just sort of like, what is even happening?
Yeah.
He doesn't know. He's a good guy, though.
He is a really sweetie.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was just wonderful. I could tell you about how I got him to write the introduction.
Tell us about how you got him to write the introduction, if it's something that you can share.
Yes.
Then let's hear the story. I really want to hear this story.
I gave his wife tea. His wife is a tea snob like I am, and I kept sending her these custom blends that I make. And because I was like that with his wife, I kind of got next to him too, and he's like, you can ask me a favor, any favor you want.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was how all that happened. I guess I was the connection, but it all boils down to tea.
That's amazing. Well, kudos and thank you, because he's read 3 of mine so far. And
3?
He's read 3 short stories. And I got to say, like, people in my town kind of know that I do something around writing, but it's not really their jam. So I'm pretty anonymous in my own hometown. But
he lives in Ohio.
I live in Northwest Ohio in a small town of about 4,000 or 5,000 people. And my mail carrier listens to podcasts when they walk around and deliver mail. So I've known Joel for years, and we have mild pleasantries. He's a nice guy, but we don't really talk about too much until he started telling me that he was listening to podcasts. And I was like, oh, what podcasts you're listening to, what novels you're listening to, and we started talking about our favorite stuff. Like 5-6 weeks later, he's coming up the driveway and he sees me and he goes, oh my gosh. And I'm like, what? He's like, I just listened to your story on LeVar Burton Reads. He's like, here I am. I've been listening to LeVar Burton Reads for like 6 months, right? And all of a sudden, he's like, and next week will be Tobias Buckell. And he's like, I deliver his mail. I know him. That was really interesting in that like more people than I realized listened to LeVar Burton Reads, because people all around the community were just sort of going like, hey man, I listened to your story.
Well, you have arrived, basically.
Like, all right then.
Wait, now, how are we doing for time? Oh my gosh.
It is 8:22. How much time do we have? Don't say that. I like to talk.
I do have a few more questions, but we
Okay.
could also take questions from the audience.
Well, let's do it fast. I'll answer them fast. Let's
okay,
go.
lightning round. Writing the Halo books. How did that happen? Game-based work. How did that happen?
That happened because I played a lot of Halo in my 20s after college.
And they knew that?
They didn't know that, but they ended up finding out because I talked to the Clarion class about networking. And when I was hanging out at my publisher's office as a brand new baby published author, my editor is a cool cat. I loved him. Paul Stevens, he's now an agent. Just a warm, wonderful human being who picked me out of the, not slush pile, but picked me out of the agent pile and read my book. And he and I get along great, but I got into publishing when I was 19, right? That was when I first sold my first professional story. And so I'm always like, until recently, been about 15 years younger than everybody around me in my cohort. And so when I was at the publishing houses, I met another 20-something-year-old editor. And I was just like, bro, we got to hang. And so we hung out and we talked shop and we talk about what you're passionate about. And I'm just like, yeah, I'm going to talk to you about Halo, because every time I talk about Halo to some of these other people, their eyes just glaze over. But I know you've played Halo. So let's talk about that. So he ended up being their tie-in editor at Tor. And so he circled back to me and said, bro. And I was like, bro.
Yeah. What about graphic novels? Am I missing?
Nope, I have not been lucky enough to make that happen.
Would you like to?
It would be fun, yeah. I would.
Okay, we'll work on that.
All right.
Do you know who John Jennings is?
I do know who John Jennings is. I adore John Jennings' art.
All right, okay.
Yeah.
We'll
John
talk
Jennings
later.
is amazing. Just frickin' amazing.
Yeah, he's done a couple of graphic novels based on Octavia Butler's
Oh, I know.
work.
Yeah.
So,
No, I creep on him on social media.
Okay. What about like middle grade or YA?
So I could tell you a whole other long sob story about me and YA. But let's just say that there is a YA novel. It's frickin' amazing because it's everything I wanted to read when I was 14 years old. And through various sad publishing stories that I just don't want to depress you all with. It's been 10 years and it still has not been able to make its way into print. I deeply believe in the story. I love it. It's basically Have Spacesuit Would Travel with a Caribbean Boy.
I feel that. Yeah. I have.
There are a lot of YA people saying like, we need diverse books, but you give them a diverse book and they're like,
well,
what do we do with this?
Could you change that? Yeah. But you did edit a YA science fiction collection, right?
I did. Yes.
Yeah.
It's called Diverse Energies. And
Yeah.
I edited that with Joe Monty, and it came out from 2 Publishing.
Hey, did you know that Joe used to be my agent?
He used to be my agent, too.
Oh.
Agent buddies!
Yeah. So that came out when? 2017?
Roughly, yeah.
Yeah.
That sounds about right.
Yeah. That's what I'm thinking. Let's see. Maybe it says in my notes. Yes. No, 2012.
Somewhere in the teens.
Yeah, whatever. We're old. It's getting blurry.
Yeah.
So you also have edited 2 other anthologies that I know of. Anything? Let's see. There was Reclaim, Restore, Return. That was with
Karen Lord. Yeah, Karen Lord is this amazing Bayesian, Bayesian is Barbadian, Bayesian author. And we put together an anthology of Caribbean climate change science fiction, which it's fun. I really like it. And the other one is even more obscure, and you'll be lucky if you can get your hands on a copy. So if you're a true collector, here's your holy grail for Tobias Buckell fiction. It is called The Stories We Tell, the Anthology of Bermudan Science Fiction, Fantasy, and Horror.
And what?
Yes.
I mean, Bermudan?
Bermudan Science Fiction, Fantasy, and Horror. So unlike the US, other countries have things like cultural departments that try to boost and groom, that's a really odd word these days, try to develop local talent. And so the Bermuda Department of Cultural Affairs reached out to me and said, hey, would you like to come spend 3 weeks in Bermuda teaching Bermudan authors science fiction, fantasy, and horror? And I said, well, yes, I would. And they were very generous and brought me out there, and I spent 3 weeks teaching a workshop on how to write science fiction and fantasy. And of course, they flew me in because they were like, we want someone with Caribbean, someone who can handle dialects, someone who can handle Caribbean history and has awareness and all this other good stuff. And basically, I don't know why they didn't go to Nallo or Karen Lord or someone else way shinier than me first, but they chose me. And so I went, and it was great fun. And when I was done, they had so much fun working with me. They said, so would you be interested in editing an anthology for us, trying to get all the Bermudan submissions together? And I said, heck yeah, I'd love to do that.
So it grew out of the class.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So about half the people in it are people who took the class, and the other half are people from open submission that I chose.
Okay.
Some fun stories in there, some just amazing stories in there, and it's filled with art from Bermudan artists from the
Ooh.
National Gallery. So it's just this object to art. It's really, I've got like 3 copies on my shelf, and every once in a while I pull it down and go like, yeah, this was pretty cool.
Internal illustrations in color?
Yeah.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
a complete, I mean, for me, it's like a complete collector's item. I'm so delighted it exists. But you
Yeah.
can only find it if you basically fly to Bermuda and go look in any of their like tourist gift shops or bookstores.
Okay.
So you know what your mission is.
Yeah, I think I have like maybe one more question. Collaborating, what's the process?
There are a lot of different processes, but my approach is basically to do the fun stuff and don't do the not fun stuff.
And let someone else do the not fun
Oh no,
stuff.
let's just take it all off the table.
Oh, okay.
Let's only do the fun stuff.
Let's collaborate.
That's why that's how you keep the friendship.
Okay, yeah. Okay, all right. And then I'll just say, as well as sharing an agent at one point, your papers are archived at NIU, Northern Illinois University.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
They asked me.
It was Lynn, right?
I was talking to Lynn one day, and I mentioned that I throw out a lot of stuff, and she was really horrified and said I needed to send it there. So I said, well, it beats tossing it in the trash, so sure, why not?
Yeah.
I'm deeply unsentimental about objects, so yeah. She found out that I was throwing away all my old, like, marked up drafts and publishers' copy edits and stuff like that. And
A gold mine of research.
I really don't think so.
Okay, well, that's it for my questions.
How do we collect the questions from the audience?
I think Marnie is in charge of
Okay.
that.
Well, if you've been following along this summer, you'll know that I have been breaking all the links, all the things. So I think the easiest thing would be if you have a question from the audience, go ahead and stand up and ask your question, and then I think, Nisi, you have to repeat it if you can do
Yeah,
it.
yeah, I'll repeat it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Question. All right. Gentlemen.
So you talk about like with the Venus thing, like you do a lot of investing in like world building, and like it sounds like you really think deeply about that. Do you come up with that first? And if you do, how do you figure out what the characters are going to be, the story, like the human element of it?
Okay, so the question is, do you start out with the world building and the research, and then figure out what the characters are doing? Did I get that right?
Yeah. Is it the story, the human story, or is it the world building? And if it's the world building, how do you figure out what the story is going to be?
That's a really good question. It changes from project to project, and when we talk about aspects of craft and writing, one of the problems is it's all one big ball, right? And when we pull something out to talk about it, it's weird in some ways because we're siloing topics that really aren't siloed in the artist's head necessarily. So world building and character are yin and yang. They're aspects of each other for me. But like in order to talk about the tools I use on one, I have to talk about it as if it's a separate process because that's just the way we have to use language, right? Show you like how my brain works, and I don't think anybody wants that as a direct scan anyway. World building affects character, character affects world building. Carrie Vaughn is an author who I really enjoy talking to, and she's great about craft and stuff like that. And she does this presentation, this workshop, I think at one of the Colorado conventions, but she's also talked about it with me, where she says that she runs the workshop through and says, can you imagine Indiana Jones being inside of Star Wars? It doesn't work, right? Indiana Jones works inside of the universe of Indiana Jones because it's the architect affects the world building affects the architect, right? You take the actor and he's the same actor, right? But the character's different, and the world building and the character affect each other. And she runs the workshop through all these exercises where they try to basically swap characters into other places to demonstrate how it can be jarring, right? So there's a lot of affecting both of them back and forth, right? We are defined in many ways by the environment we're a part of, and so I think that that's true in fiction as well. So that's an unsatisfying answer, because artists are like, it's complicated, right? So some stories I start with world building, because that's what got me interested about the story.
The Xenowealth books.
Yeah, they started with world building because I did like this entire year of research as a senior in college, and I was just like, well, we can't let that go to waste. But other stories start with a dilemma, a plot, emotion. Some of them start with character. The trick is to make sure that you're giving everything its fair attention. So it's like if you've done all the world building and now you're putting a character in it, you're looking for like what kinds of characters are in this world, how are they affected by this world, and how do I represent them, and then how do I fully form them so that they can be cast loose into this world and properly inhabit it, you know? So yeah. The older I get, the more woo-woo I sound about this. You know, if you caught me 20 years ago, I'd be like, you start with world building and you map everything out on a piece of paper and, you know, and now I'm just sort of like, I don't know, just launch yourself out into the space and see if something is coming, you know, see if it's coming together.
There was a story that you wrote just from a feeling, right?
Yeah.
Which one was that?
Well, different ones have come from some different feelings. There, Drew at University Books was just asking me about one of the stories in there and asked me if it was a COVID story. And I was like, no, but it came from an emotion that would be very recognizable to people in COVID times. And that's why it resonates so strongly. And that was just sort of rage at general mishandling of things by authorities.
Okay. Rage.
Just rage. I was just trying to process rage. And so, you know, sometimes like art can be a little self-indulgent. I generally try to steer away from that, but I was trying to process something.
I have another question, but I think there might be more in the audience.
Should we have some? Oh yeah, there's one in the back. Yes, sir.
So just an easy one, hopefully. The bibliography on your site doesn't list any craft books. Do you have one that you're working on that's going to come out ever?
There is a craft book. It's called...
Wait, I'm supposed to repeat it. Sorry.
Oh, I'm
yes. Yes, bibliography on the site, not listing craft books. Are there any?
There's a book called It's All Just a Draft, which I was not able to get some copies of to bring here. And it's a combination, speaking of self-indulgent, it's half autobiography and half writing advice because I find it hard to separate context from the advice. In other words, I want you to understand where my mind was when I made certain choices about craft because that context is really important. Because I don't want someone saying like, you know, I read in a craft book that you said always do X. And I'm like, well, no. What I said was, in the context I was in, I learned that X is really powerful because all I can think of when someone gives me a rule are 1,000 different caveats and exceptions. So
you give a writer a rule and they're going to find a way to break it.
we have to.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes?
I have never seen Tobias without a hat.
Yes, sir.
Do you get sunburned?
I wore the hat, and I still wear the hat. I just didn't pack it because, you know, you always forget one thing. Oh, yes. All right. I'm loving it. I can't quite tell what I'm supposed to be doing here.
Looking good.
Looking good?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe a little, yeah, there
There we go. All right. Thank you. Thank you. I always have a flat cap when I come out in public for an author event. So this is one of the rare moments where you can see that I'm a 43-year-old man who's balding in back and have decided to shave my head and grow a beard because why not? No, I started wearing the hat in college because there was a flat cap for sale at the college university bookstore. And I bought it because Samuel L. Jackson was in Pulp Fiction, and I was like, that dude is one cool motherfucker. And if I can just draft off of that just a little bit, I'll do it. But what was just really funny was when I put it on, everyone around me said, "That is you." And I said, "Okay, well, I guess I'm keeping it." And I've been wearing flat caps ever since. And I'm mildly obsessed with Kangol flat caps, to the point where I was on a trip to New York and I sought out, because I knew it had to exist. I knew there had to be a flat cap store in New York, because that's just the sort of thing you would find. And not only did I find a flat cap store, I found a Kangol flat cap store. So when I burst in through the front door, I startled the owner, because I came in hot. I was like, "Oh my God, I knew something like this had to exist in New York. I'm so excited to find you. You have no idea." So now I have a guy in New York, and he has my number. And occasionally I get a text that's like, "Kangol 504s are on sale for 15% off. Your size is this." And we stretch them on the hat stretcher for 15 minutes to get them to this size for your head, because we've got your measurements in the system. And also, there's a variant that I think would look good on you that's a whatever that just came in. And I'll be like, "Yes, I will call you momentarily with my credit card number." And we're going to make it happen. So.
The one that you're wearing, by the way, is made by my friend Kate Schaefer. That's a custom hat there.
Awesome.
Yeah.
The Kangol store? It's just the Kangol store? No, I don't know what it's called, because you know how I found it? By sheer frickin' chance. I was walking Karen Lord. Let's bring it back. Karen Lord happened to be in New York, and I happened to be in New York. And we were like, well, we gotta like meet for coffee just to say like we both happen to be in New York. And she wasn't as familiar with some parts of New York, and I was like, "I have nothing to do. I'll walk you up to your next appointment in the Upper West Side." And then she's like, "But what am I taking up too much of your time?" I'm like, "Oh, after I'm done talking to you, I'm just gonna go search for a flat cap store. Like, that's the only thing I have on my agenda today, other than meeting you." And she was like, "Okay." So I'm walking her up the Upper West Side, and swear to God, what do I pass? A Kangol flat cap store. Like, I just stopped in front of it, and I told her, "Well, there it is." After I drop you off, I'm just coming right back here and buying hats. That's what I'm doing. So yeah, every once in a while he texts me. I don't have it on my text right now. And when he does, I buy a hat. It's a good arrangement. We're all happy.
Yes.
Hi. Okay. So in the introduction, the person who introduced you, whose name is escaping me right now, I'm sorry.
Amy.
Amy said that, talked about how you would go to great lengths to save a story. Can you talk a little bit about that and about some of the techniques you use for that?
So the question is, from the introduction, we learned that Tobias will go to great lengths to save a story. And we want to hear more about how that happens, what you do.
Well, that is that's just a lifetime of learning a lot of the craft, So there's like art, there's inspiration, and then there's craft, that kind of like, if I make 100 chairs, like I can make you a chair quick. And I can even kind of compensate for a flaw in the chair's design by kind of making it up as I go along, because I've made 100 chairs. So I've made a lot of stories kind of, I love seeing a story and seeing what works in it and trying to figure out how to get it to where it needs to be. I know that would be sick and tired of hearing like, well, to take this up to the next level, I would recommend. But that's kind of how I think of it. I'm not too concerned with where the story is. I'm just very concerned with just sort of like, what can we do to punch it up and get it up to another level? And there are some really smart writers that I occasionally see will sit down with someone and be like, it's time to abandon that story, and move on, or reframe the idea of what they're working on. And I just have this sort of stubbornness of just like, there's always a way to kind of make it work, even if it just requires some brutal Frankensteining of it. Chop this part off, move this part over there, rearrange this, and you've got kind of a functional structure. And then all you need to do is some sanding and buffing, spackle a little bit, and move it over there. So I don't have like any deep, dark secrets other than just sort of like 23 years of trying to fix things that weren't working.
And persistence.
I have a lot of persistence. Yes, I'm very bullheaded. So there's I'm ADHD. I've mentioned that. Oppositional defiance. Anybody? So yeah, the more someone tells me it can't be done, the more I'm convinced it can be done. So when someone comes to me and says my short story is broken, can I get a second read on it? I don't think I'm going to be able to rescue it. My immediate like spidey prickly sense is just sort of like, oh, bullshit. Like, we can fix this. There's nothing we can't make more readable.
More, that's a relative value.
But it's all relative. Yeah. The thing that I notice the most is, chopping about 3 pages off the beginning and chopping about 2 pages off the end is always the first thing. That's a good start. Taking a look at the flow and the scene structures. There's a lot of stuff that can be done with just kind of pulling the reader through really quickly by making sure you end scenes just right, so that there's a lot of momentum. Just old, boring tricks, cliffhangers, and then like just giving protagonists something to protag about. We laugh, but like the gentleman in the front was asking, how do you take the human line and run it through a world you've built? And very often we as writers get so excited about the world we built, we want to take you on the tourist brochure trip through it.
Here is the steam grommet factory, and this is where we make our steam grommets.
Exactly. It's just sort of like, I invented some cool shit, and I swear to God I'm going to take you and see it, whether or not you wanted to see it or not. And so then you start getting this plot puppet phenomenon where the characters are not inherently characters with agency, but they're just being shoved around by the authorial intent. And so the trick there is, either you spend a lot of time trying to embody and round out the character, or there are a bunch of really cheap tricks that you can use to make a character feel fully realized, like giving them some hard decisions to make. Doesn't even really matter what they are as long as they seem plausible on the page. So you can kind of back your way into that, right? Like, well, I know they're going to go to the right, but I'm going to give them, in the edit, a really compelling reason to go left. And so I'm going to have them look like they're agonizing over it. But man, I already got this figured out. They're going to take 4 rights, a left, and go straight, and they're at the end of the story. But I need to throw enough, chaff into the air so that the reader's confused. They don't know which way they're going to go. But I've got a good sense.
I'm asking a question, I'm sorry. Are you of the school that thinks that characters do things on their own, or are you of the school that says, I control the character?
I am all of the above, because I love to experiment. So do I think that the characters live and breathe and have agency of their own that come to life on the page? No, but I kind of understand where that comes from. And I think that if you can kind of model another human being in your head deeply enough, that they would balk at certain decision trees, and if you do a really good job of defining a character, it should be pretty obvious how they'd behave. Again, Carrie Vaughn does this trick with how would Indiana Jones behave if he was in Star Wars, right? What's really funny about that is people in the audience can always say how Indiana Jones would behave if they were in Star Wars or vice versa. The other one is like Blade Runner is another Harrison Ford acted character. What would Deckard do if he was in Star Wars? Well, he would be a stormtrooper. Right? Am I wrong? Right? Okay. So, he'd be. Fair enough. He started out as a storm. See, but this is what I'm talking about right here. That character is so modeled in people's heads that we can have this discussion, and everyone is going to be like, yeah, actually, he's more right than Toby, right? Right? That's the power of like a fully modeled character, and that's what writers are talking about when the character throws up objections, right? Which is that no, Deckard would have started his career as a stormtrooper and then quit and become, a contemporary of the Mandalorian, right? He would have been out there doing bounties, not the Mandalorian, but Boba Fett. So he would have been hanging out with Boba Fett doing bad things for the Empire, right? And so it's just like that shows you kind of where you can get into that headspace where the character starts to dictate if you fully realize them. But ultimately, most of the time, they dance for me.
Okay, okay.
All right.
I think
I think we got the sign.
yes, I think we're done. I think we're done. I think we did all right. Okay?
I mean, we filled the time.
Thank you.
Thank you.